A dirt road in rural Georgia. Dust in the air, a sheriff's siren whining in the distance.
Hey, isn't that Cletus? Hey, Cletus! Sounds like old times. I got him in sight, Sheriff.
And then, a bright orange car launches off a hill, tires spinning, horn blasting Dixie mid-air. It lands hard, keeps going. This wasn't subtle television. This was the Dukes of Hazzard. It was loud, it was ridiculous, and it became one of the most watched shows of the early 80s. But behind the jumps, the jokes, and the banjo music were car graveyards, political panic, network fear, and a show that nearly collapsed under its own success. Tonight, we separate fact from fable. If you grew up watching the General Lee fly, or secretly wished your car could, hit subscribe, because this story is wilder than you remember. The Dukes of Hazzard premiered in January 1979, inspired by the film Moonrunners. The concept was simple: two good-hearted troublemakers, one corrupt local system, and a fast car that never ever stopped running. The show leaned into spectacle, chases every episode, crashes every episode, a car jump almost every episode. Rumor had it that the car jumps were carefully planned and reused, but most jumps were one take only because the cars didn't survive. If the jump worked, great. If it didn't, they swept up the pieces and moved on. The real star of the Dukes of Hazzard wasn't Bo, Luke, or Daisy. It was the car, the General Lee, bright orange, number 01, and absolutely disposable. Here's a little known truth. They destroyed hundreds of cars during production. Estimates range from 250 to over 300 Dodge Chargers. Some lasted one episode, one jump, and one bad landing. By later seasons, Chargers became so scarce that the production team had to weld multiple wrecks together, reuse shells, and sometimes painted over visible damage. The goal wasn't perfection, it was airtime. But the fans noticed something strange. Early seasons had clean, graceful jumps, but later seasons were wilder, sloppier, and more cartoonish. That wasn't an accident. Viewers thought the stunt team got careless, but in reality, they were running out of usable cars. To keep the spectacle going, jumps became exaggerated. Higher ramps, shorter run-ups, harder landings. Some cars folded in half on impact. Stunt drivers routinely exited vehicles bleeding and went again. One famously said, "If the car landed on all four wheels, we'd messed up." John Schneider and Tom Wopat became instant heartthrobs, farm boys, charm, and mischief. And suddenly, they had leverage, which caused a major problem. By season 5, contract disputes exploded. Rumors said the actors were fired, but the fact was, they walked away during a salary dispute. The network panicked and made one of the strangest decisions in TV history. Enter the replacement Dukes. Two new cousins, same clothes, same car, different energy. Fans hated it. Ratings dipped immediately. The show had proven something crucial. You can replace props, you can replace stunts, but you can't replace chemistry. The originals returned after one season with higher pay. Lesson learned. Catherine Bach didn't just play Daisy Duke, she created a cultural moment. The shorts weren't in the script. She brought the idea herself, cutting jeans shorter and pairing them with boots. If you thought the network executives approved the look immediately, you are wrong. They were nervous until ratings spiked. Daisy Dukes entered the cultural vocabulary almost overnight, and Bach became one of the most recognizable faces on television. But she was never treated as decoration. Daisy was smart, capable, and often the only adult in the room, and viewers noticed. At its core, the Dukes of Hazzard wasn't about crime. It was about getting around rules you didn't respect, corrupt authority, small-town power, and outrunning consequences. That playful defiance resonated deeply in the early 80s. The Dukes didn't hurt anyone. They didn't steal for profit. They just refused to play along. And that spirit made the show feel electric. Before the sheriff's siren, there was the horn, Dixie. The General Lee's horn was instantly recognizable. Cheerful, defiant, unforgettable, and for decades, most viewers never questioned it. If you thought the horn choice was meant to be political, it wasn't. It was chosen because it sounded playful and fit the show's rural tone. The producers wanted something recognizable, non-threatening, and light-hearted. To them, it was a musical gag, not a statement. But history has a way of catching up. Years later, the horn became controversial in ways the creators never anticipated. A reminder that pop culture can age in unexpected directions. Why? Because the horn played Dixie, a song that over time became widely associated with the Confederacy and the American Civil War, and by extension for many people, with racism and exclusion. At the time, it was just part of the fun. Boss Hogg should not have worked. He was greedy, corrupt, loud, and comically selfish. And yet, he became beloved. Why? Because Boss Hogg was never cruel. He cheated the system, sure, but he didn't terrorize the town. At the time, it was thought Boss Hogg was written as a true villain, but he was intentionally softened to keep the show family-friendly. Sorrel Book played him with exaggerated charm, turning corruption into farce. He was the kind of bad guy you laughed at, not feared, and that distinction mattered. If Boss Hogg was the brains, Roscoe P. Coltrane was the enthusiasm. Roscoe wasn't evil, he wasn't even competent, but he was loyal, excitable, and perpetually outmatched. Rumor was that Roscoe was dumbed down for laughs, but the fact is, his over-the-top behavior was carefully calibrated to avoid violence. Roscoe chased the Dukes endlessly, but never with real danger. That kept the show playful, as there were no guns and no real harm, just dust clouds and bruised pride. Here's a fun fact that surprises almost everyone. The Dukes of Hazzard became one of the biggest merchandising juggernauts of the early 80s. Toy General Lees, lunchboxes, action figures, bedsheets, board games, model kits. Kids didn't just watch the show, they played it. If you thought merchandising was planned from the start, you'd be wrong. It exploded organically after Season 1 ratings, which shocked executives. The General Lee became one of the most recognizable toy cars of the decade, even rivaling Hot Wheels icons. Ironically, the show made more money off-screen than on it. Some critics mocked the show for repetition. Same chase, same jump, same escape. But that was the design. The writers didn't run out of ideas. Episodes were intentionally formulaic. Why? Because the show was made for syndication, casual viewing, and kids jumping in mid-episode. You didn't need context. You needed a car, a bad guy, and a jump, and audiences loved it. Here's something fascinating. The show was most popular in cities, not rural America. Urban viewers loved the open roads, the freedom, and the lack of rules. To them, Hazzard County wasn't small town. It was escape. The Dukes weren't just country boys. They were fantasy rebels. By the mid-80s, the show faced an unusual issue. It was too big. Car shortages, rising stunt costs, cast salary demands, and creative burnout. Every episode had to top the last. More jumps, bigger crashes, and louder jokes. The charm that made it special began to strain. The show wasn't failing. It was exhausting itself. Here's a subtle but important truth. Bo and Luke never really evolved. They didn't marry, they didn't age, and they didn't learn lessons. The show avoided character growth, because growth would have broken the fantasy. The Dukes existed in a loop, a world where justice reset every episode, and that timelessness is why kids could watch it endlessly. By the mid-80s, the Dukes of Hazzard was still popular, but it was slowing down, not because audiences disappeared, but because the show had simply done everything it could do. Hundreds of destroyed cars, thousands of jumps, endless chases, and familiar story loops. The formula that made the show iconic had also boxed it in. But the show didn't collapse because viewers turned on it. It ended because the spectacle became unsustainable. Stunts were expensive. Cars were harder to find. The novelty couldn't escalate forever. In 1985, After 7 seasons, the Dukes parked the General Lee for the last time. John Schneider, who played Bo Duke. Schneider leaned into music, television, and film, becoming a familiar face throughout the 80s and beyond. He embraced the Duke legacy rather than running from it. Tom Wopat, who played Luke Duke. Wopat shifted toward theatre and music, carving out a respected career far from car chases and jumps. Catherine Bach, who played Daisy Duke. Forever linked to the shorts that became cultural shorthand, Bach continued acting, but also became a symbol of confidence and independence, rather than novelty. Sorrel Book, who played Boss Hogg. Book, a highly educated actor, famously played Boss Hogg intentionally exaggerated, ensuring the character never felt threatening, only ridiculous. He performed on stage, screen, and television, and acted in more than 100 plays and 150 television shows. He died in 1994, age 64, from colorectal cancer. For decades, the General Lee remained one of the most recognizable cars in television history. Then, cultural conversations shifted. Symbols were re-examined. Context mattered more. Intentions were questioned. The car didn't disappear overnight, but it gradually faded from merchandising, reruns, and promotion. The Dukes weren't villains. They were fictional folk heroes from a very specific time, understanding that distinction matters. Despite debates and re-evaluations, something important remains true. People still love the Dukes of Hazzard, not for politics, not for symbolism, but for its joy, simplicity, movement, and fun. It was a show where nobody died, nobody stayed angry, and justice always reset. That innocence is rare now, and nostalgia has a way of preserving feelings, even when context evolves. So, what did the Dukes of Hazzard really leave behind? Not perfect television, not deep storytelling, but something else. Permission to be silly, permission to chase joy, and permission to believe the good guys always land on 4 wheels. It was a show about movement, not destination. They didn't change television forever. They didn't need to. They gave us laughter, adrenaline, and a bright orange blur that flew when it shouldn't have. And decades later, we still smile when we hear that horn. And sometimes, that's enough.